"Grandpa, my parents are going to take your money after the party." She said it like she was commenting on the weather. Quiet, steady, her small hand curled into the sleeve of my jacket. It was her 11th birthday, the kind of day meant for frosting and helium, not financial warnings. The chatter in the living room was still going strong, the clink of glasses and the muffled laughter spilling down the hallway, but for me, everything narrowed to that one sentence. Most people imagine that in a moment like that, you drop your drink, call someone out, demand answers. I didn't. I've learned that the worst thing you can do when someone thinks they're about to win is to let them believe you're still behind. That's the reason you're hearing my story today. I'm grateful to Dear Revenge Stories for giving me the chance to share it here. And if you've ever been betrayed, humiliated, or made to feel invisible by your own family, hit subscribe right now and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. I crouched down to her level. "You did the right thing telling me," I said softly. "For now, we keep this between us. I'll take care of it." She nodded once, brave because she thought I was. We stepped back into the glow of the room together, and I let my eyes wander, not in panic, but in study. The thing about people who are planning something is they can't help rehearsing it in their heads, and it shows in how they move. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, hovered like a shadow, always managing to place herself between me and any conversation that might accidentally drift toward money. Daniel, my son, laughed louder than the joke required, complimented my wisdom like a salesman patting the pitch. They kept glancing at each other, quick flicks of the eyes like invisible hand signals. For 11 years, since the day Sophie was born, I had covered bills, fixed problems, and filled gaps without being asked. Over $3 million, if anyone was counting. They never said, "Thank you," like they meant it. Gratitude for them seemed to be an optional extra, and I'd stopped expecting it. Still, I had assumed that the quiet arrangement we lived under was stable. Sophie's whisper told me otherwise. When she looked my way, she gave a small, careful smile, the kind you shouldn't have to learn before you're 12. It made me proud of her composure, furious that she needed it. The cake came out, candles flickering, voices rising in song. Wishes were made, applause scattered across the table. Vanessa topped off my glass before I could refuse, asked twice about my sleep, patted my arm like she was testing for fragility. Daniel dodged questions about work, about the economy, about anything that might involve numbers. After the presents, after the photos, after I helped Sophie untie a stubborn ribbon, she slipped an envelope into my palm with the precision of a magician. Her handwriting on the front told me more than the weight inside ever could. Children don't seal envelopes for casual secrets. I didn't open it there. You don't cut a wire without knowing where it leads. From the couch, Vanessa and Daniel were laughing with guests, completely unaware that their finish line had just been moved. I didn't open the envelope at that moment. Instead, I placed it in the inside pocket of my blazer, next to the pen I'd been carrying for years, but almost never used. If there's one thing you learn after 7 decades on this planet, it's that timing isn't just important, it's the entire game. From my seat in the corner, I watched them. Not like a hawk, more like a patient surveyor, mapping out terrain before building something permanent or before deciding to burn it down. Vanessa was always efficient in her movements. But tonight there was a sharpness to her efficiency, a precision that had nothing to do with hosting and everything to do with control. She handled the wine like it was a prop in a performance, pouring it with exaggerated generosity, making sure my glass was never empty long enough for me to stand up and mingle freely. It was a tactic. Keep me still. Keep me contained. Daniel, on the other hand, had a different role. He'd always been charming, in a way that works on strangers, but eventually frays when someone knows you too well. He laughed too loudly, told stories that were just slightly inaccurate, as if reality could be softened with a better punchline. He asked about my health more than usual, not out of care, but as if mentally checking a box in some invisible list. They didn't know I'd seen this before. Not from them, but from people who thought they were clever enough to rearrange the pieces of my life without my consent. People forget that generosity, when abused, has a breaking point. Over the years, I had made choices, paying off their first house, clearing medical bills, covering school tuition, even funding Daniel's business when it was nothing but a shaky plan on a napkin. More than $3 million had left my accounts for their benefit since Sophie came into the world. And for what? To see that money treated like it was owed, like it was part of the air they breathed. Sophie didn't speak again that evening, but I caught her watching them the way I was, her young eyes sharp in a way no 11-year-old should be. She was learning, faster than most, that family could be both your safety net and the scissors. At one point, Daniel tried to steer me into a conversation about future plans, casually mentioning how property values were dropping, how interest rates were unpredictable. He laughed as he said it, but his eyes flicked toward Vanessa, and hers flicked back. It was the kind of exchange you might miss if you weren't already looking for it. I answered in the way I found most effective, by not answering at all. I let him talk himself into circles, each one a little smaller, a little tighter, until he realized I wasn't stepping into the trap he'd set. The evening wound down, the guests trickled out, and Vanessa insisted I'd take a plate of leftovers, her smile as polished as the silverware she'd been guarding all night. Daniel walked me to the door, his arm briefly on my shoulder, warm enough for appearance, empty enough for truth. In the quiet of my car, I finally took the envelope out, turning it over in my hands. It was heavier than I expected, not in weight but in consequence. Sophie's handwriting was neat, deliberate. She'd pressed harder on some letters, as though urgency could be etched into paper. I didn't open it then, either. Not yet. I wanted the house empty, the night still, my thoughts sharp. This wasn't just about reading what was inside. It was about deciding, before I even saw the words, what I was going to do with them. When you've spent a lifetime building, giving, protecting, you learn that the first move after betrayal determines the rest of the game. And tonight, the board had shifted. You don't spend over $3 million on people without remembering the shape of it. Not the numbers themselves, though I could recall most if pressed, but the moments they were dressed up as necessity, wrapped in urgency, delivered with the kind of smile that says, "You won't regret this." It started with the house. They were just a little short on the down payment, and I was still naive enough to believe that a strong start meant a strong future, so I wrote the check. The day they moved in, Daniel told me it felt like their home at last. He never said thank you. Then came the medical bills. Sophie's birth wasn't easy. Complications, specialists, hospital stays longer than anyone had planned. I covered them all without a second thought. You don't put a price on a life, but you do, apparently, put a pattern on a relationship. School tuition followed. Just until the business takes off, Daniel said. The business being a half-formed idea that lived mostly in his head and occasionally on napkins. It never took off. I paid anyway, because education mattered, and because I still believed gratitude would grow where generosity was planted. It didn't. Vacations, family emergencies, a car that died too soon, a second car when the first wasn't big enough for the image they wanted to project. Each request was smoothed over with a promise, and each promise evaporated as soon as the check cleared. Vanessa perfected the art of couching every ask in the language of inevitability. It wasn't, "Would you help us?" It was, "Since you'll be helping us." They never kept track, but I did. Not on paper. I didn't need to. The ledger lived in my bones, in the quiet recognition of every small concession, every shifted boundary. And yet, I never asked for a payment. I didn't even want it. What I wanted was something far rarer: acknowledgement. Sophie was the only one who ever gave it. A thank you in a child's handwriting, a drawing of me holding her hand. No one prompted her. She just saw it. That's why, when she whispered to me at her party, I believed her instantly. She'd been watching too. What Daniel and Vanessa never understood is that help, once assumed as a given, stops being help. It becomes infrastructure. They built their lives on a foundation they didn't own, then acted surprised when I noticed the cracks. From across the room that night, I saw them moving through guests like hosts in a home they could truly claim. Laughing, serving, performing the role of a self-made couple. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Not that they took, but that they built a story in which they never had. That envelope in my jacket was no longer just a message from Sophie. It was an audit. Not of my finances. I knew those well enough. but of my own willingness to keep playing my part in their fiction. And I was starting to think the next chapter might read very differently. You don't burn a bridge while you're still standing on it. I learned that early, maybe out of necessity, maybe out of instinct. So that night, I didn't do anything obvious. I didn't raise my voice, didn't fold my arms, didn't let it slip that every smile I gave was carefully measured. But I started counting. Not in numbers. I've been doing that for the past 11 years. I started counting glances, pauses, conversations that stopped when I got close. I began tracking in my mind the way Daniel leaned in to listen to Vanessa and then laughed in a way that felt more like code than reaction. How Vanessa made sure my glass was never empty, even when I deliberately set it aside. Every gesture they made was a piece on a board. They didn't realize I was already watching from above. Sophie stayed within reach, almost as if she wanted to be a visible reminder of why I was there. She didn't say anything else about what she told me, but she didn't need to. Kids know more about silence than most adults. Every now and then, she'd give me that quick look, not of fear, but of confirmation, as if to say, "You saw that too, right?" And I did. By the end of the night, when the guests started drifting out, I made a point of helping with the dishes. Vanessa tried to refuse at first, then smiled and said it would be nice for me to join in, that it would make me feel like part of the moment. That wasn't genuine hospitality. It was calculation, a way to show others she included me, when in reality, she wanted to control the conversation and the movement around me. She handed me a wet plate and a dish towel. While I dried, I spoke about trivial things. The weather, the traffic, how fast Sophie was growing. Daniel joined us, and suddenly the kitchen felt too small. They listened to me with excessive attention, as if they were waiting for me to say something specific. I didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I let it slip, as if it didn't matter. I need to stop by the bank tomorrow morning. Vanessa froze for less than a second, but long enough for me to catch it. Daniel did what he always does, filled the space with a laugh and a question about anything else. That was exactly what I wanted. Small cracks. And cracks, if pressed just right, turn into breaks. When I finally left, I already had a plan forming in my head. Not a plan for confrontation. That would be too predictable. I wanted something slower, more precise. Not just to protect what was mine, but to make it clear they had underestimated the wrong person. Outside, the cold night air cut through the sweet scent of cake still clinging to my clothes. Sophie came to the gate to say goodbye. She squeezed my hand, and, in that quick, almost invisible way only children with secrets know, tilted her chin toward the living room where Vanessa and Daniel were arguing too quietly to hear. "Good night, Grandpa," she said, smiling in a way no 11-year-old should know how to smile. Good night. But that wasn't what she meant. The next morning, I didn't go to the bank, but I let everyone think I did. I put on my coat, grabbed a leather folder where I keep important documents, and left the house at the exact same time I usually made deposits. I greeted the doorman, mentioned something about having a few things to take care of, and let him finish the rest of the narrative himself. People love filling in the blanks. Instead of heading downtown, I went to a discreet little cafe, the kind that still serves coffee in porcelain cups and doesn't ask for your name. I ordered a black coffee, sat at the corner table, and while the steam curled upward, I started writing. Not letters, I'll leave that to Sophie, but a list. A long, detailed list of everything I had done for Daniel and Vanessa over the past 11 years. From the imported crib when Sophie was born to the kitchen renovation last autumn. From the vacations in resorts paid for as gifts to the no-deadline loans. Each line had a number next to it, and when I totaled them up, it came to over $3 million. I didn't write it to play the victim. I wrote it to remember. Because memory, when it comes to ungrateful people, is the sharpest weapon. As I scribbled, I realized something that made me smile. A cold, almost invisible smile. In all these years, I had never received a thank you that wasn't immediately followed by a request. They didn't see my help as gestures, but as obligations. As if my role in life was to sustain them. I finished the coffee, folded the paper neatly, and slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat. It wasn't just a list. It was a map. On the way back, I stopped by the bank. I walked in, greeted the manager as if I were there out of routine, and asked her to review a few documents just as a precaution. Nothing that would draw too much attention, but enough so that if someone asked, there would be a record of my presence. When I got home, the landline rang. It was Daniel. His voice carried that false casualness that only fools those who want to be fooled. He asked how my day was going, mentioned a football game, and at the end, slipped in. We were thinking we could stop by tomorrow, just to talk. I smiled into the emptiness of the room. Of course, son. That would be nice. I hung up, already knowing tomorrow wouldn't be a talk. It would be the first test. They arrived earlier than they said they would. That alone told me everything I needed to know. People who plan an ambush rarely arrive late. From my spot in the armchair, I watched through the sheer curtains as Daniel's car slowed in front of the house. Vanessa stepped out first, her coat buttoned all the way up despite the mild weather. Her hair fixed in that precise, calculated way that always made me think she practiced her expressions in the mirror before stepping outside. Daniel lingered behind the wheel for a moment, lips moving. A last-minute briefing, no doubt. When they knocked, I didn't rush to open the door. Let them wait. Let them feel the weight of the seconds. Finally, I opened it with a practiced one. Well, this is a nice surprise. We settled in the living room, me in my armchair, them on the couch opposite. The distance was deliberate, formal. Vanessa's smile was polished but hollow. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. A posture meant to suggest a sincerity, but the way his eyes kept flicking to hers betrayed the rehearsal. The opening was harmless enough. Sophie's birthday gifts, the cake, the lovely atmosphere at the party. But then Daniel shifted. Dad, we've been talking. You've done so much for us. For Sophie, more than anyone could have expected. 11 years of support. I don't think people realize what that means. Vanessa tilted her head, her voice coated in sweetness. And we want to give something back. You've carried so much for so long. We just think maybe it's time we carried something for you. Daniel took a breath, as if easing into the real pitch. We were thinking, what if you gave me power of attorney? Full power. That way, if anything ever happened, an emergency, I could handle everything for bills, property, investments, all in one place. No stress. Vanessa jumped in like she'd been waiting for the cue. It's not about control. It's about protecting you. It would be a way for us to honor you for everything you've done for us. Reward, in a way. I said nothing. Silence is a dangerous mirror. People tend to fill it with their own reflection. They began over-explaining, layering on flattery and reassurance, as if sheer volume could mask the weight of the request. I leaned back, my hands steepled. I appreciate the thought, I said finally. Truly, that pleased them. Vanessa's shoulders eased. Daniel smiled like he'd just secured the opening move. They had no idea they'd just shown me the exact shape of their plan. When you've spent over a decade funding someone's life, more than $3 million. To be precise, you learn to recognize when a gift is just another transaction in disguise. I let my eyes wander to the window, feigning contemplation. Why don't we sit down next month? I'll look over my documents, and we can talk it through. They left believing they'd planted the seed. In reality, they just handed me the proof I needed to dig deeper. When the door closed behind them, I walked to my desk and picked up Sophie's envelope, still unopened. Heavier now, not because of its contents, but because I knew it would confirm exactly what I'd just heard, and I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. Timing is the most underrated weapon there is. And this game was only just beginning. I didn't open the envelope that night. I wanted to God. I wanted to. But some instincts are stronger than curiosity. Timing has a way of turning information into a weapon, and I wasn't about to waste ammunition before I knew the shape of the battlefield. 2 days later, with the morning light cutting through the blinds in clean, sharp lines, I sat at my desk and slid a letter opener beneath the flap. The paper inside was folded twice, neat as a banknote. Sophie's handwriting marched across the page in the unsteady confidence of someone who still cared about every letter. Grandpa, I think you should know what Mom and Dad said last week. Her words didn't rush. They took their time, like she understood that once read, they couldn't be unread. They told Aunt Carol that you've been forgetting things a lot. that sometimes you repeat yourself, that you don't always remember where you put stuff. Mom laughed and said it's just age, but Dad said it might be something more serious. They told her it's been hard for them and they're trying to keep you safe, but if you won't cooperate, they might have to step in. I let the paper rest on the desk for a moment, my fingers still curled around it. Step in. Such a neat little phrase for taking over someone's life. Sophie went on. They also said this to Mr. Harris after church, but they didn't see me there. I was sitting behind the pillar. Dad told him you've been mixing up names and dates, and Mom said you can get confused with numbers. They said they don't want to, but they might need to get legal guardianship before it's too late. Guardianship, the nuclear option. The kind of legal maneuver that makes a power of attorney look like a friendly handshake. And they were building the case in advance, planting seeds, letting whispers grow roots. If I refused to hand them the keys, they'd simply take the whole house. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't clumsy greed. This was a campaign, slow, patient, designed to make me doubt my own mind, or at least make others doubt it. The irony was almost amusing. I had, in fact, misplaced a few things lately. My reading glasses, a receipt from the hardware store, once even a newspaper, but only because I'd been so busy paying for their lives that I hadn't had time to organize my own. 11 years, over $3 million. Birthdays, tuition, home repairs, medical bills. And now, in return, they were drawing a portrait of me as a doddering old fool in need of rescue. I could have been angry. I was, in a quiet, glacial way, but more than that, I was entertained. If they thought I was going to fight this head-on, they hadn't learned a damn thing about me. The surest way to lose to a predator is to run. The surest way to win is to make them believe they've already caught you. I folded Sophie's letter and slid it into the top drawer, placing a plain sheet of paper on top. From the hallway, my reflection in the glass cabinet looked almost tired enough to fit their story. Good, let them see it. There's an art to being underestimated. They were about to learn just how dangerous that can be. In the weeks that followed, I let their version of my life take root. I didn't deny it. I didn't correct anyone. On the contrary, I began to contribute small pieces to the puzzle they were building. False pieces, carefully crafted to fit their narrative, but that, in the end, would form a very different picture. On Daniel's first visit, I left a notepad with scrambled dates on the table. He looked at it and tried to hide the satisfied smile. "Are you jotting down something important, Dad?" he asked, as if it were casual curiosity. I shrugged, trying to keep things in order, but sometimes I get them mixed up. Vanessa, for her part, couldn't resist testing the boundaries. One morning, she brought a cake out of nowhere and watched closely, almost anxiously, to see if I would remember that it was Tuesday and not Sunday. I made a point of thanking her for the Sunday gift, and when she corrected me, I touched my forehead with a faint laugh. "Well, guess I don't even know what day it is anymore." I saw the light in her eyes. Not compassion, but calculation. Meanwhile, I started recording everything quietly. Conversations, visits, phone calls. Every detail that could one day show exactly what they were trying to do. I hired a lawyer, not an old friend I trusted, but someone from outside with no ties, who would occasionally show up at my accountant's office just to organize my old papers. With Sophie, I kept our pact. I didn't overload her with details, but she could tell I was moving pieces. When she mentioned that her mother had talked about hiring a specialist to evaluate my mental health, I just smiled and said, "Sometimes it's better to let people think they know more than they do." I also began to reorganize my assets, but in a way that wouldn't draw attention. Small transfers, changes in ownership, updated documents, all with dates and justifications that, from the outside, looked like the harmless whims of a disorganized old man. The hardest part was resisting the urge to confront them, not out of rage, which was constant, but because of the temptation to cut the game short. But I've learned that certain victories only matter when the opponent thinks they're about to win. And I wanted them to believe that until the very last second. With every visit, with every calculated look of pity, I felt we were all performing. They played the concerned children. I played the father who needed to be protected. But in reality, It was all just a rehearsal for the day the curtain would rise and the play would reveal its real ending. The day I'd been waiting for arrived without warning. No set date, no formal invitation, just a spontaneous visit from Daniel and Vanessa, bringing Sophie along as a pretext. They walked in wearing that rehearsed air of casualness. Vanessa with a smile far too wide to be natural, Daniel carrying a leather folder. Sophie gave me a long hug, but her eyes said more than words. They're ready. We sat in the living room. Vanessa offered tea. Daniel placed the folder on the table. It didn't take long for him to open it, pulling out a document I recognized instantly, the infamous full power of attorney. "Dad," he began, his tone a mix of false concern and forced intimacy. "We've been thinking a lot about how to make sure everything you've built stays safe. And we also think it's time you were rewarded for everything you've done for us." I stayed silent, letting his words hang in the air. He mistook my silence for hesitation and went on. "With this power of attorney, we can take care of everything for you. No bureaucracy, no worries. Just sign, and you'll never have to bother with bills, properties, investments." I looked at the document for a few seconds, as if considering it. Then I let out a small sigh. "And this would be a way for you to protect me?" I asked. "Exactly," Vanessa said, leaning forward. "And also, it's fair. You've helped us so much. This would be a way to give something back." As she spoke, I remembered the conversations I had recorded. The offhand remarks to neighbors and acquaintances about my poor memory and constant confusion. How they had carefully and consistently planted the idea that I was no longer in full control of my decisions. Also that, if I didn't sign, they could use it as grounds for a guardianship petition. I smiled, small, almost invisible. "I understand," I replied, my voice low and deliberate. "But decisions like this deserve to be thought through carefully." I slid the document back into his folder, closing it with a calm gesture. "Let's talk more about it later. Today, let's enjoy the fact that Sophie's here." They nodded, trying to hide their frustration. But I already knew. Every no I gave, without making it sound final, tightened the noose around their plan. And when the time came, they'd have nowhere to run. I knew they were expecting a direct confrontation, an outburst, something that would confirm the narrative they'd been quietly trying to build about me, the grumpy, mentally unstable grandfather who couldn't manage his own family, which was exactly why I would never give them what they wanted most: proof. The most dangerous weapon I had wasn't anger, it was silence. Strategic silence. I started with subtlety, as if I had no intention of doing anything beyond keeping my usual routines. No accusations, no raised voice. Just small detours in conversation, casual remarks that at first glance meant nothing. But each one was a silk thread pulled slowly, loosening the fabric they thought they controlled. In the first few weeks, I chose moments when others were around. Family lunches, coffee with neighbors, Sunday get-togethers. Those were the times I'd let slip harmless sounding observations. "Funny thing, have you noticed how Daniel's been so interested in my paperwork lately?" Said with a lazy smile, as if it amused me. Or, "Vanessa's been taking such good care of me that I think she knows when I'm going to cough before I do." The laughter that followed was always light, but I caught the quick glances, the faintly raised eyebrows. Like tossing small stones into a still lake, the ripples traveled farther than they realized. I began showing up more in social circles, attending community events, charity dinners, distant birthday parties. Always with flawless posture, sharp memory, precise details about dates, names, conversations from years ago. I made sure people saw me as mentally sharp, fully present, as intact as I'd been in my prime. Each time they witnessed that, the version Daniel and Vanessa were trying to sell of a forgetful, confused old man began to look less believable. At the same time, I started what I called the living file, a black notebook kept in the second drawer of my study, where I wrote everything down. Stray comments I overheard, subtle shifts in tone, changes in body language. I recorded a few conversations on my phone, discreetly, when the air between us shifted and they let things slip they'd never say in public. Sophie, without realizing she was playing a crucial role, added pieces to the puzzle. She'd tell me how sometimes her mother lowered her voice when she was on the phone and Sophie walked by. Or how her father's mood changed, almost snapping, whenever inheritance or investments were mentioned. With every note, the picture became clearer. They weren't just preparing to convince me to sign that power of attorney with full control. They had a backup plan, spread the idea that my mental health was declining, so they could secure legal guardianship if I refused. Elegant, really. A cruelty wrapped in concern. Meanwhile, in the visible world, nothing changed. I still smiled in photos, joined the jokes, listened to the same recycled stories. But underneath, I was working the gears. I started visiting my lawyer more often. Nothing ostentatious. Nothing to raise suspicion. Just preventive adjustments to my will. A reorganization of assets. A few strategic transfers. Small moves, but each one calculated to make it impossible for anyone to drain my accounts without leaving a trail. I also reinforced ties with key people. The bank manager, an old friend at the corporate registry office, a longtime doctor. All of them, in subtle ways, made aware that if anyone came forward claiming I was unfit, they'd have fresh stories ready to tell about my lucidity, memory, and decisiveness. On their faces, the confidence remained. They still acted as if every step was invisible to me, as if I was 3 moves behind on the board. But the truth was the opposite. Every move they made gave me more material, more predictability, more control. The secret wasn't to knock the card house down in one blow. It was to wait until they placed the last card on top, thinking they'd won, and then blow, gently, and watch the whole thing collapse. And through it all, Sophie still hugged me the way she did on her birthday. But now, there was a weight to it. She wasn't just my granddaughter anymore. She was the only innocent witness to a dirty game I was determined to win. The more I watched them, the more I understood their rhythm. Daniel's patience had limits. He was the kind of man who mistook waiting for weakness. Vanessa, on the other hand, had the patience of someone who'd spent years playing the long game. But even she couldn't mask the flicker of irritation when plans didn't move fast enough. I decided to speed things up. Not by confronting them. That would have been too loud, too final. No, I wanted them to feel confident enough to make their move before they were truly ready. Confidence makes people sloppy. It started with an accidental slip. At a Sunday lunch, I mentioned to Vanessa that I'd been thinking about simplifying my financial arrangements. I let it sound casual, even weary, like a man tired of juggling details. I saw her eyes sharpen just slightly before she smoothed them over with a smile. "Oh, that makes sense, Dad. You've done so much for us over the years. Maybe it's time someone takes that weight off your shoulders." Weight, a perfect word choice. Something heavy, something I'd want to put down. I nodded, as if she'd said something profound. Daniel joined in, offering that careful, too rehearsed tone. "We could help, you know? Just to make sure everything's in place, in case of emergencies." That was the opening I wanted. "Maybe," I said. "We'll talk about it soon." From that moment, I noticed the subtle changes. More frequent visits. More questions disguised as casual conversation. Vanessa started dropping by with food, just because. Lingering longer than necessary, peeking into my study when she thought I wasn't looking. Daniel brought up my legacy in conversation, testing the waters. Behind the warmth, there was calculation. I could almost hear the click of their mental abacus, counting down the steps to what they thought would be their victory. What they didn't know was that my simplifying had already begun, but in the opposite direction. I'd shifted the bulk of my assets into protected structures they couldn't touch without my explicit consent. And in some cases, even with it, they'd need third-party authorization. The rest, I'd moved offshore. With the help of a lawyer who knew how to make paper trails vanish into a maze of legitimate transactions. Still, I wanted more proof. Enough to dismantle any claim they might make about my supposed mental decline. So I gave them more rope. I let Sophie overhear small, planted comments about my forgetting where I'd put things. Or mixing up dates, all harmless, all staged. Then, I waited to see if those details would come back to me through other people's mouths. It didn't take long. Within 2 weeks, a neighbor jokingly asked if I'd managed to find my watch yet, a watch I'd never lost. Someone at church mentioned that Daniel had been worried about my memory lately. The whispers were traveling exactly as I expected. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for, Vanessa brought me a folder. Inside was a pre-drafted power of attorney, granting them full control over my finances, my medical decisions, my estate. She presented it like a gift. We just thought, after all you've done for us, maybe this is a way for us to finally take care of you. The phrasing was perfect, sentimental enough to sound generous, but with the teeth of a legal noose. I smiled, took the folder, and told them I'd think about it. I could feel their relief, their premature celebration. They thought they were one signature away from control. What they didn't see was that my lawyer was already preparing a very different document, one that would lock them out completely if they tried anything further. But I wasn't ready to end it yet. No, I wanted them to believe they'd already won, because the fall is always hardest when it comes from the highest point, and they were still climbing. There was a strange kind of peace in knowing the game was already decided long before they realized they were playing. The folder with the power of attorney Vanessa had handed me still sat on my office desk, untouched since that day. I kept it there on purpose, like a carefully placed stage prop to maintain the illusion. Every now and then, I'd run my hand over it, making sure the gesture was visible whenever they visited, a silent nod that said, "I'm still thinking about it." But the real decision had been made weeks earlier. My lawyer and I had completely rewritten my will. The inheritance, every property, every investment, every cent would go entirely to Sophie. No percentages for her father or mother. No joint administration or temporary usufruct. It would all be hers. But, and here lay the crucial point, she wouldn't be able to touch a penny until she turned 21. Until then, the assets would be held in a closed trust, managed by 2 trustees I handpicked, people with no ties to my family, but with an unshakable tie to me. This arrangement served 2 purposes. First, to protect Sophie from her parents' immediate opportunism. Second, to teach her that an inheritance is not a winning lottery ticket, but a burden and a responsibility. She would have time to mature, study, and understand the value of what she would receive. When I explained the clause to her, her eyes widened. But they're going to be furious. They will, I said. And that's the fun part. It wasn't revenge in the shallow sense of the word. It was simply aligning consequences with actions. Daniel and Vanessa had treated my generosity as an entitlement, an endless cash machine that magically refilled itself. Over the last 11 years, I'd spent more than $3 million on them, not on luxuries for myself, but on bailing out debts, paying for schools, covering urgent emergencies that always seemed to coincide with trips or renovations. There was never genuine gratitude, only the expectation that I'd keep going. Well, that expectation was about to be demolished. The final signature on the will was silent, almost anticlimactic. No thunder, no dramatic music, just the pen gliding across paper and the lawyer saying, "It's done." All the power lay in what they didn't know. I kept my routine as if nothing had changed. I still showed up for Sunday lunches, listening to Daniel talk about future plans and Vanessa praising my good memory with a measured smile. The kind of compliment she believed was a test. I wouldn't notice. They were still convinced they were one step away from getting the power of attorney. And I remained convinced that when the truth came out, it would be one of those moments when silence is worth more than any speech. The kind of silence that cuts. Daniel called me saying he needed to stop by the house to settle something quickly. His tone was cordial, but carried that rehearsed urgency, the kind you hear when someone already has their speech prepared. When he arrived, Vanessa was with him. They came in together, and the way they sat side by side on the couch, with folders and papers neatly placed on the coffee table, reminded me of a pair of lawyers about to present a case. "Dad," Daniel began, leaning forward, "we've been talking about everything you've done for us." "And it's a lot," Vanessa added, with a smile that never touched her eyes. "You've been generous. Always there. Always helping." I stayed silent. Silence is an underrated weapon. "That's exactly why," Daniel went on. "We think it's time to make sure everything stays safe. You know, to avoid any problems in the future." Vanessa pulled a paper out and set it in front of me. "It's just a power of attorney, full powers, so we can act quickly if anything ever happens." and as a way of recognizing everything you've done for us. I looked at the document without touching it. Full powers, I repeated, tasting the bitterness of the words. That includes selling, transferring, moving, signing, everything, right? Yes, but Daniel rushed in. It's just formality. Trust, Dad. We're family. I took a slow breath, looked at each of them, and for the first time, spoke without filters. Do you know how much I've spent on you since Sophie was born? Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift. Oh, we've never thought about it that way, she said. I have, I cut in. Over 3 million reais. School, trips, the renovation of your house, a new car when the old one broke down, overdue bills. Even Sophie's nursery, I paid for it. Daniel opened his mouth, but I kept going. And never, not once, have I heard a thank you that wasn't automatic. Like thanking a waiter for bringing the coffee. It's always sounded like it was my obligation. Silence filled the room. Vanessa tried to smile, but her expression was stiff. We know you've always wanted to help. No, my voice came out firm. I always chose to help, and now I choose to stop. That's when I pulled an envelope from my pocket. I placed it over the power of attorney, pushing it slowly toward them. Don't worry about my signature, I said calmly. I already signed something, but it's not what you brought. Daniel frowned. What is it? My updated will, I replied, as if commenting on the weather. All of my inheritance, all my assets and investments have been placed in Sophie's name. She can only access them when she turns 21. Until then, you won't control a cent. Vanessa went pale. But, that's prudence, I cut in. I know you've been telling people my mental health is failing, that I've been forgetful, setting the stage to try for guardianship in case I didn't sign this power of attorney. Daniel flushed red, his eyes avoiding mine. Dad, it's not like that. It's exactly like that, I said. And I'm not upset you tried. I'm upset you thought I wouldn't notice. I stood slowly, slipping the envelope back into my pocket. I've always said the greatest gift I can leave my granddaughter is security, and now she has it. You still have a home. You still have her presence. But you no longer have the illusion that you can manipulate me. They sat there, unsure whether to argue or explain. I walked to the door. Oh, and one more thing, I added before stepping out. The day Sophie turns 21 and opens what I left her, I want you in the room. Not to thank me, because that won't be necessary, but to remember the day you underestimated the man who raised you. I closed the door slowly, feeling that for the first time in years, the board was exactly as it should be. Thank you for staying with me and listening this far. Your attention is a gift. Did these minutes mean something to you? Then please, follow the channel. Every click from you is a push that helps me keep bringing stories that truly stay with us.